how are you this, well, it's freaking 10 o'clock at night here in St. Louis. You can make all kinds of money on YouTube if you say that the housing market's going to crash, right? People are always like, oh my God. If we can instill fear, we can get clicks and we can make good money. I've kind of tried to not be that guy. And there's a couple reasons for it. One, like I want to be around for a while. So when the market does change, I don't feel bad about saying that the market will be good. Like it just seems to be obvious. Are the crash bros going to change when things get better? I don't know. But I just think that's more of a way to do. Plus, I feel like everyone's right at some point. Okay, so like you could argue the people that say the housing market's been great. I mean, look at the numbers, right? Look at the numbers. Look at the average, the median sale price in the United States right now. It's stupid high. So there hasn't been a crash, right? Now, are there headwinds? Absolutely. But I just haven't been that way, and I try not to do clickbaity titles and stuff like that. Maybe one slips through every once in a while, but I mean, it's not a big part of the viewership. Let's put it that way. So I lived through 2007, and I don't think it's 2007. I don't think it's 2007 to 2009. I don't think so. But I do remember things that were very similar, and here's a couple of things that were similar. One, I can remember people having extra houses, okay? So, like, your friend would have 2 or 3 houses and only lived in one, and, like, the other 2 were houses that they were going to get around to fixing up at some point in time, but never did, and then they ended up eating it when the market turned. So that's something that's stuck with me. The other thing that stuck with me is I was in Detroit, Michigan at the time, and the auto manufacturers were going under, and they had to be bailed out by the government during Bush and then Obama. But it was like everybody stopped buying things up there. Like that's where I kind of came up with an idea of, at least seeing behavioral economics like in real time. Like people had been stretched credit-wise. Their small business has been stretched, and because they're always trying to build more. They're always trying to be bigger and bigger and growth and show growth. And when they were over-leveraged, when things went south and the people stopped going to the stores or stopped buying the services, it was amazing to see how many businesses collapsed like quickly. Now, there are things in this economy that are concerning. Obviously, we haven't had the energy prices as far as gasoline ramp up yet. I think they will. We have record credit card debt. I don't think that's great. The average price of a home is, I think, way too high, and the increase has gone too quickly. But again, I don't think that the 2007, 2008 is the right barometer. And so I saw this article on Yahoo. It's a reprint from Fortune, but here's the headline. It says, buckle up for more turbulence in the housing market. Bank of America says it's a house recession, the 1980s style. Now, I was born in 1977. Okay, so I was 3. I've heard stories about the Jimmy Carter and then moving on to Reagan, and but I didn't live it. Okay, but I wanted to go over this kind of in depth and just kind of see if we can make the parallels. I'm concerned that we're not in a situation like 1980s United States. I'm concerned we're in a situation like Japan in the mid-90s, like where there was just stagflation and nothing for years and years and years. That's my big concern. So here it goes. It says, housing market pessimists have sounded the alarm for years about a pending crash in the U.S. residential real estate market. Now, let's just be fair. Why would somebody say there's going to be a crash? Well, the word crash engenders fear, right? And if we can get enough people, to be afraid, maybe they'll click our videos, maybe they'll click our posts, and we'll get engagement and we'll make money and it'll be great. But when somebody defines a crash, so is it down 20%? It's not going to be down 20% in a day or a week or a month. Maybe over a couple of months, the prices may go down. But anyway, even before the Federal Reserve began hiking interest rates to fight inflation last year, pushing mortgage rates to a 23-year high this month, years of surging home prices left some experts warning that the housing market was a massive bubble ready to pop. Now, look, I was saying in January of like 2 years ago, look, we got to raise rates just a little bit. Inflation's coming in too hot. We need to do something. It isn't transitory. Okay, now this is me, a guy basically on the street. I don't have, I mean, I've taken economics classes, but I don't have the air of what I'd say, invincibility that the Fed has. We're not allowed to, we're not allowed to question the Fed. And I was like, we don't have to raise the rates much, but we just have to like cool this thing off. And that was my hope. It didn't happen. However, despite a widely bearish outlook in the industry, most real estate veterans have avoided arguing that home prices will drop like they did during the 2008 crash that kicked off the global financial crisis. And so far, that's been a wise decision. Now, does that mean that I'm a wise old person? I don't know. Anyway, it says, still a Bank of America team led by U.S. economist Jesse O. Park warned this week that there's more turbulence coming for the housing market due to high mortgage rates. They explained that they're getting an eerie feeling of deja vu, but it's not 2008 that's coming to mind, it's the 1980s. Looking back at previous housing recessions, we think the 1980s are a better analogy for today's market than the 2008 housing crash, they wrote in Thursday Now. Now look, I don't know that this fellow was alive in 1980. And I would offer that, I mean, like we didn't have cell phones and we may have had personal computers, but they were not as strong as a calculator. Information was much more limited, and I do believe that the information is vastly different. The sources, I mean, the amount of information one can get now versus then is absolutely unbelievable. So I get uncomfortable with the idea that we can take the numbers from then and the numbers from now and compare them equally, because I think that it's how things are calculated and things have changed since the 80s. It says this isn't 2008. While the housing crash of 2008, fueled by the collapse of subprime mortgages, haunts the memories of many Americans, the real estate market of that era was very different from what Bank of America's experts see today. Now I don't 100% agree with the subprime mortgages were the culprit. There were other things that were going on. So I mean, was it a contributor? Sure. But, it wasn't the only thing. Park and his team noted that there are no noticeable signs of excess housing development today like there were back then. And households aren't nearly as burdened by the mortgage debt. Okay, so there's no noticeable signs of excess housing development today like there were back then than 2008. And I would just say that it just depends, right? People say that we're lacking supply in the marketplace. I've argued that there are people right now that own hundreds of homes, right? Quote unquote, small mom and pop investors. So we have many, many homes that are owned by, landlords, institutions. So I don't know that that's necessarily true. If things were to go south and those people were to sell, then there'd be much more supply quickly. And then it says household mortgage debt represented roughly 65% of U.S. consumers' disposable income in the second quarter, compared to 100% before the great financial crisis. And the ratio of America's mortgages debt to their real estate assets, also called loan to value, was just 27% in the second quarter, compared to over 40% in 2008 and roughly 50% in 2010, Bank of America data shows. Now look, household mortgage debt represented roughly 65% of U.S. consumers' disposable income in the second quarter, compared with 100% before the great financial crisis. Now look, I don't remember it that way. I'm sorry. It's not how I remember it. New legislation was also enacted since the great financial crash to help prevent worst-case scenarios in the housing market. Yeah, we had to get as real estate agents, we had to get our fingers printed. One of the most obvious effects of these new laws is there are fewer risky adjustable rate mortgages today. Adjustable rate mortgages can lead to higher default rates when interest rates rise, but they now represent less than 5% of the total purchase and refinance loans, compared with over 35% at the peak of the pre-Great Financial Crisis housing cycle. Now, look, there's two things I have a problem with on that. One, you're not going to get an adjustable rate mortgage when your mortgage is 3%. So historically, so many people have moved in the past 2 years, 3 years. They didn't need to get an adjustable rate mortgage because they were doing so well just on a regular 30-year fixed. And second, they say, well, the subprime mortgages are gone. You don't have that problem now. But to secure short-term rental properties, people are using just income alone as the basis for getting loans. If you think that's not a problem when vacancy drops to 50% on those places, then we just simply disagree. It says, is it a repeat of the turbulences of the 80s? According to Bank of America, today's housing market looks a lot more like the early 80s than it does 2008. Back then, just like today, home prices had boomed for years before Fed officials were ultimately forced to hike interest rates aggressively in an attempt to fight inflation. Well, I wasn't around. I know that there was high inflation, okay? But I don't know that the housing prices were, exploding like they are now. I just don't know. The rise in consumer price index peaked around 14% in 1980 before then Fed Chair Paul Volcker's hawkish policy sent mortgage rates to 18% in a year's time, cooling inflation but sparking a recession. This caused a serious downturn in the housing market in which home sales and building levels cratered. However, national home prices actually remained stable. So I don't think they calculate the consumer price index like they do now. So I don't think we can use that as a good comparison. And, I don't see that I'm not saying that national home prices couldn't remain stable. I'm just saying there's an awful lot of stuff going against it. At the start of the Volcker's term as Fed chair in August of 1979, the median U.S. home sales price was $64,700. And after a near doubling of mortgage rates, that figure rose to $69,400 by the second quarter of 1981. All right, and so here's where we have these kind of, I would say, issues. Like, as a real estate agent, right, transactions are terrible, historically bad. Okay, applications for mortgages, not great, historically bad. Okay. Without transactions, can't feed the family. And you may say, well, that's great. I don't like real estate agents anyway, and I get that, but I don't see this the same way, in the sense that housing prices have shot up so quickly and so fast, and I know they're kind of sticky on the way down. So as a percentage share, 64,700 to 69,400 to me is not the same as $200,000 house 2 years ago, $450,000 house now. I just think it's a much different situation. Over the past 18 months, the Fed's current chair, Jerome Powell, has been following a very similar game plan to Volcker's, raising interest rates aggressively to quash inflation. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate, the most common type of mortgage in the U.S., has soared from 3.8% in March of 2022 to over 7.5% today. As a result, this in turn has slowed mortgage purchase applications and caused home sales to plummet, just as it did in the 80s. But home prices, echoing the dynamic of that era, have yet to collapse. Well, and then how are we going to define collapse, right? Is it the same as a crash? I mean, I'm not trying to do wordplay for you. I'm just saying, look, are prices going down in the future? Probably. It says one of the key, and this is where I had a little bit of a confusion with this article. It says one of the key reasons for the resilience of the housing market in both these periods is demographics. Noticeably, demographics were favorable back then, with baby boomers having entered the prime home buying age. Park and his team wrote Thursday, arguing millennials are in a similar position today. Some sales activity should be supported by millennials reaching the prime home buying age, and single-family building permits have steadily held up. This can help the housing market retain some of its momentum without falling apart. And so I would just refer to this. This is on Twitter. This is CH Economica. The implication of exploding housing rental prices can be seen in the collapse of young adults' willingness, capability, and desire to form families and have children in a single generation. The tide has turned from perpetual population growth to secular population decline and degrowth. So this is California since 2009. The 0 to 20-year-olds are down 924,000 or 9%. 20 to 40-year-olds are up 562,000, up 5%. So the idea is that people of childbearing age are not having children nearly at the rate that they were before. So what I would say is, if this is true, right, that millennials are right, perfectly set up for buying homes, well, what's going to happen after when there aren't as many people? Just by the demographics. So, I don't agree. It says, with rates likely staying higher for longer, we are cautious of potential turbulence ahead. Bank of America has previously forecasted 0% home price growth and falling home sales for the full year in 2023, but it didn't offer a new prediction in its latest note. Look, we're in the middle of October. We have 2 months. I just don't see their prediction working out. It says, eventually, as inflation fades, leading the Fed to cut interest rates, housing affordability will improve. At that stage, we should see a more stable and healthy housing market. Park and his team wrote, until then, hang tight and maybe it might be right. Now, look, I don't see it that way, okay? You say, well, how do you see it? Well, I see it like this. At some point in time, we're going to have to manage the debt, okay? We have student loan debt. We have credit card debt, right? And the banks are holding mortgage debt, okay? They're holding 3% mortgages, right? And the current interest rate is like 7% or 8%. That can't be good, right? And you say, well, why are the banks holding all that mortgage? Well, they very little that they can actually invest in. The Fed has got them so wrapped up, they can only really buy mortgage-backed securities, which is, questionable. So I see that as a problem. I see inflation when they say inflation is lowered, they mean like month over month, but it's still increasing. So, right? So they'd say, oh, it was only 3.7% last month, and now this month it's 3.2%. Well, that's 6.9% over 2 months. It's not good. It's not good. And then you had Paul Krugman with his wonderful chart a few days back that excluded, I think it was food, energy, and rents, for him to argue that the inflation has been solved. There's no issues whatsoever. And he's a very horrible, disingenuous person. He works for the regime, and he always will, and that's where he makes his money. So I don't expect anything other than that. What could cause? House prices are going to come down at some point, right? Are they going to collapse? I don't know. I have no idea. But the idea that this is like the 80s to me, not accurate. And here's something kind of fun is, do we have to compare it with another time period? Couldn't it be on its own? We've got a situation where it looks like the United States is financing 2 conflicts in the world right now, or will be. I just don't see. The amount of money being paid just to pay down the debt, right? Just to make payments on the debt, and it's not paying it down. They're not even there yet. We're in some financial problems now. How will that fall to Main Street? I don't know. But I don't think it's like the 80s. I think it's its own problem, and I think that we will see some things going forward that indicate that maybe, prices will go down enough. So with that, I'm going to head on out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you on the next one.